He ran the streets like royalty, but the moment that he went behind bars, the very crew that once worshipped him started turning their backs. Give me just 1 minute, and I'll show you why the most feared man in the Mafia was suddenly left behind like yesterday's news. And by the end of the video, you'll know exactly how the Gambinos treated their so-called king in prison, who's really calling the shots today, and how often they even bothered to visit him. Oh, and I dug through FBI files, court transcripts, and mob interviews just to bring you the real story, not the sugar-coated version. So let's begin. Now, before the prison jumpsuit and the inmate number, John Gotti was the guy running New York like a 5-star general. Now, you probably know him as the Teflon Don, the boss of the legendary Gambino crime family, one of the most feared and powerful crews in all of New York City. But how did Gotti climb to the top of that mobster food chain? Well, you see, Gotti couldn't stand Paul Castellano, the then boss of the Gambino family. He thought the guy was out of touch, greedy, and way too disconnected from the streets. And the truth is, in the mob world, if you don't have that street credibility, you're basically just a CEO in a suit that no one respects. But it wasn't just personal hate, because business was involved. Gotti had a beef with Castellano over money, specifically how much Gotti was pocketing from his truck hijacking operations at JFK Airport. Castellano didn't like it, and Gotti didn't seem to care. Then there were rumors that Gotti was dipping into the drug game. Heroin, to be exact. Super profitable, but also strictly off limits according to Castellano, who banned drug dealing under threat of death. Now, in 1983, the feds nailed Gotti's brother Gene and his buddy Angelo Ruggiero for dealing heroin, and it all came from tapes recorded by a hidden bug inside Ruggiero's house. When Castellano caught wind of it, he wanted the transcripts immediately, but when Ruggiero refused to hand them over, Castellano threatened to demote Gotti, and that threat might have been the last big mistake that Castellano ever made. So by 1984, the feds hit Castellano with a RICO indictment tied to none other than Roy DeMeo, the notorious Gambino hitman and his very bloody crew. Then, just 1 year later, another indictment. Not exactly the kind of resume that you want to be submitting to the FBI. Now, facing life in prison, in either case, Castellano needed a plan. And what did he do? He appointed Gotti, his golden boy Thomas Bilotti, and Thomas Gambino as acting bosses, while he tried to stay out of jail. But you see, Gotti wasn't really looking to play along. Behind the scenes, Gotti was already forming a secret alliance of fed-up mobsters, including Frank DeCicco, Joseph Joe Piney Armone, Sammy the Bull Gravano, and Robert D.B. DiBernardo. The streets called them the Fist. Yeah, that name kind of tells you everything you need to know, doesn't it? Now, Gotti knew that Castellano would come for him eventually, and he wasn't about to just sit around and wait. But here's the thing. In the Mafia, taking out a boss isn't exactly easy. There are rules, like needing a majority approval and no commission vote. In fact, what Gotti was planning would have been the first unsanctioned hit on a 5 families boss since the attempted hit on Frank Costello in 1957, and the first successful one since Angelo Bruno got whacked in 1980. So how did Gotti pull it off? Well, he rallied support from key players in the Lucchese, Colombo, and Bonanno families. People his age, with fewer ties to Castellano. Then came December 2nd of 1985. Gotti's longtime mentor and one of the most respected underbosses ever, Agnello Della Croce, passed away from cancer, and Castellano didn't even bother to show up to the wake. To Gotti, that was blasphemy. On top of that, Castellano had the audacity to revise the family leadership structure, bumping Bilotti up to underboss and leaving Gotti out in the cold. Oh, and he started planning to dismantle Gotti's crew. And that, my friends, was the moment that Gotti decided that Castellano had to go. In December 16, 1985, Gotti got a tip from his guy Frank DeCicco about a sit-down with Castellano and some top Gambino capos at Spark Steakhouse. Now, for most people, that would mean dinner, drinks, big fat juicy steak, but for Gotti, that meant go time. As soon as Castellano and his driver, Thomas Bilotti, stepped out of their car that night, both were gunned down on the spot. Gotti wasn't even hiding in the shadows. He watched it all go down from a nearby car, with none other than Sammy the Bull Gravano in the passenger seat. Now, just days after the double murder, Gotti was placed on a temporary ruling committee with Gallo and DeCicco, and a month later, in January 15th of 1986, the Gambino family holds a meeting of 20 capos. And guess who walks out as the new king of the underworld? Yeah, John Gotti. And during his reign, the Gambino family undoubtedly became the most powerful mafia family in America. We're talking an estimated $500 million a year in illegal earnings. But you know what they say, the higher you climb, the harder you fall. And oh boy did he fall. By 1992, Gotti's empire had come crashing down like a house of cards in a hurricane. He thought he was untouchable. People called him the Teflon Don because no charges ever stuck. But eventually, even the Teflon starts to wear out. This time, the charges stuck like glue. We're talking 5 murder convictions. And on top of that, add conspiracy to murder, racketeering, obstruction of justice, tax evasion, illegal gambling, extortion, and loan sharking. He was given a life sentence, no parole, just cold concrete and steel that slammed shut in Marion Penitentiary. But here's the sad part. It wasn't the feds that took Gotti down. It was his own guy, Sammy the Bull Gravano. Yeah, the same dude who was riding shotgun during the Castellano hit, turned government witness. He spilled everything. Names, crimes, details of their operation, no loyalty, no omerta, just a full betrayal. And so just like that, the dapper Don went from strutting through Manhattan to pacing a 6x9 cell in total isolation. Locked up in 1992, stayed locked up until his death in 2002. And while that sounds like the end of the story, it's really just the beginning. So you might be asking, what happens when a man who virtually controlled an entire city ends up in a little 6x9 cell? Well, it gets worse than you would think. And here's the million-dollar question that pretty much everybody wants to know. Did Gotti run the prison, or did the prison run Gotti? Well, this was the real deal. No posh setup, no steak dinners from the outside, no guards slipping him an extra perk in exchange for respect, no cigar lounges, no secret mob councils behind laundry carts, just cold steel and concrete walls that didn't care who you were on the outside. Even Gotti's lawyers didn't agree with the treatment. They called Gotti's conditions borderline inhumane, even unconstitutional, and honestly, they were onto something. See, Gotti wasn't in your average cell block. He was locked down in administrative detention at the Metropolitan Correctional Center, which sounds kind of fancy, right? But don't let the title fool you. It's just solitary confinement with a fancy business card. Now, in reality, he was stuck in a 6x9 box for 23 hours a day with no sunlight and barely any human contact. And the thing is, he was supposed to rot there while the courts dragged their feet, deciding whether to lighten his load or, pretend they even cared by holding a hearing. So now we're left asking, was this really about justice? Or were they just trying to make an example out of him? Gotti's lawyers claimed that prison officials couldn't even cough up a real reason for why he was being stashed away from the rest of the prison population. They had him locked up on the 9th floor in a block so grimy, so depressing, inmates nicknamed it the Roach Motel. And let's be honest, if prisoners are giving a place that kind of nickname, you know it's gotta be bad. Now Gotti wasn't having it. He demanded a hearing. Because hey, if you're gonna treat the Teflon Don like he's gum on the bottom of your shoe, you better have a darn good reason. Now, the government argued that they were just being cautious, not cruel. According to the feds, Gotti wasn't locked up in some medieval dungeon. They just said that he was being handled like any other high-profile inmate. But deep down, we think they knew the truth. If Gotti even so much as got a whiff of the general population, he'd probably turn the whole place into Gambino HQ 2.0. So isolation wasn't punishment, it was actually prevention. And the way they described Gotti's living conditions, well, it made the Roach Motel sound like a haunted shoebox, with mold, leaky pipes, and a side of despair. Now here's the ugly truth. The guy was jammed into a tiny cell for 23 hours a day, with barely any light. No newspapers, no radio, no TV. Just him, the silence, and probably his own thoughts screaming at him. And for someone like Gotti, that kind of isolation hits way harder than anything else. And let's talk exercise. That is, if dragging him up to the rooftop at 7:45 a.m. in blizzard weather counts as exercise. Snow, sub-zero winds, the whole Frozen soundtrack playing in the background. Oh, and what about a legal defense? Impossible. Gotti was allowed just one 10-minute phone call a day. That's not a legal strategy. That's barely enough time to order pizza, let alone fight a life sentence. But come on, who doesn't love pizza? Hey, real quick, if you're into Mafia drama, real criminal history, and the wild downfall of once untouchable men, hit that subscribe button and leave a pizza emoji in the comments. Let's see how many people made it this far. But as the saying goes, even legends can't escape time. In 1998, John Gotti was hit with throat cancer. The diagnosis landed him in the United States Medical Center for Federal Prisoners in Springfield, Missouri, where they did what they could to remove the tumor. Just 2 years later, the cancer came back, sending Gotti back to Springfield. By June 10, 2002, at just 61 years old, Gotti's health was completely shot. He passed away in a prison hospital. But don't think for a second that his story ended there. Oh no, because his death unraveled everything that he'd built. At his funeral, there was no grand church service. Instead, they used a non-church facility. No representatives from the other New York crime families even bothered to show up. Meanwhile, the Gambino family was left in shambles. Half of their made men were now locked up, and with Gotti gone, there was a huge power vacuum. So the burning question was, who was going to take over? Who had the guts, the muscle, the iron-fisted control to fill those massive shoes? The Gambinos needed a new boss, but who could possibly match Gotti's legacy? So on paper, John Gotti Jr. seemed like the obvious choice to take the reins of the Gambino family. I mean, he was the son of the Dapper Don himself, right? But you see, stepping up wasn't exactly like inheriting a throne. It was more like taking the wheel of a sinking ship during a full-blown storm. The family's connections were all over the place. The feds were breathing down their necks, and the mob's golden age was rapidly fading. Gotti Jr. tried to step up into his father's shoes, and his uncle tried to hold things together. But let's be real, neither of those guys could command the same level of respect or fear that Gotti Sr. did. And even if you're the son of a notorious mob boss, Gotti Jr. had a lot to live up to. He was inducted into the Gambino family on Christmas Eve of 1988 by Sammy Gravano, and just 2 short years later, at 26, he became the youngest capo regime in Gambino family history. But when his father got slapped with a life sentence in 1992, the pressure shifted squarely onto Jr.'s shoulders. But what was the plan? Well, originally, Gotti Sr. would continue to pull the strings from behind bars, with his son and brother acting as his mouthpiece. Now, in theory, it should have been a seamless transition, but in reality, it was a disaster. Gotti Jr. quickly learned that running a crime empire wasn't as easy as just wearing the title. His men didn't trust him, rival families didn't respect him, and he didn't have his father's ruthless negotiation skills. So what was the result? Well, failed deals, broken alliances, and mounting tension within the ranks. The fight was real, and Gotti Jr. fought through while trying to escape one charge or another. But even with all that drama, the prosecution couldn't convince the jury. Before December of 2009, Gotti Jr. had 4 trials, 4 swings, and 4 misses. And so by January of 2010, the feds officially announced that they were done trying to nail him. For Gotti Jr., it was a lucky escape, but for the Gambino family, well, it was just the beginning of the end. The name might have carried some weight, but the organization itself was now falling apart. The Gambino family was more of a legacy now than a functioning crime family. But what happened after Gotti Jr. and his uncle? Who's calling the shots now? Well, let's get into the modern Mafia. The Gambino crew is clearly not what it used to be, but not to get things confused. They're still out there working in the shadows, just quieter and a bit smaller. And of course, they still come up in the headlines from time to time for racketeering, drug deals, extortion, you name it, but just not on that old school scale. So now let's talk about the Mafia moment that made 2019 a year to remember: Frank Cali's murder. Cali, the Gambino boss, was gunned down right outside of his Staten Island crib. For the first time, a Mafia boss got clipped since Castellano in 1985. But the big question, was it an inside job or a rival crew? The answer is no. Cops say it was personal. But come on, when has that ever stopped the mob rumor mill? Now, right after Cali's death, Lorenzo Menino reportedly stepped up as the new boss. But as the dust was settling, another bomb dropped. In March 2019, Anthony Pandrella was charged for murdering 77-year-old loan shark Vincent Zito. Why? Well, he owed the guy $750,000 and thought that Zito might strike first. So what did he do? Well, he showed up and shot him in the back of the head, then faked concern like he wasn't the actual triggerman himself. But you see, karma caught up to him by June of 2022. He was found guilty and got hit with 40 years behind bars. The thing is, 2019 was not a good year to be a Gambino. The FBI and Italian authorities went full-blown tag team on them. In July, they busted Thomas Gambino and 14 other people in a massive raid stretching from Sicily to the US. Oh, and get this, Thomas was caught on camera chilling on a speedboat with the Inzerillo bosses, allegedly talking real estate deals tied to the late Frank Cali. Rosario Gambino also got roped in. So yeah, it was a full-on family reunion, but with criminals. And the hits kept coming. In December, Gambino capo Andrew Campos and 9 others were taken down in a Bronx Westchester mob sweep. These guys were allegedly threatening people for money. Then the next day, John Simonlachai, a top exec at HFZ Capital and cousin of mob associate Mark Chippy Kochai, got hit with fraud charges. Turns out Campos's crew had a little side hustle going on, bribing their way to fat construction contracts. I guess you grease the right hands, you can build an empire. Now fast forward to 2020, when Capo Frank Calypso Camuso, soldier Louis Astuto, and associate Robert Rusty Basalice, plus 20 more defendants and even 26 companies got slapped with indictments. The big fish here, though, was Basalice, VP of the Grimaldi Group, and allegedly the king of shady bidding games. I'm talking $4.2 million worth of shady. Now meanwhile, Astuto and Paul Noto were busy funneling stolen cash into the Camuso family businesses. Because if you're gonna steal, well, you might as well keep it in the family, right? But wait, it gets even messier. Fast forward to November 8th, 16 more Gambino members and associates got hit with charges of racketeering, extortion, witness tampering, union scams, the works. Those involved include Captain Joseph Lanny, soldiers Angelo Fifi Grattalone, James Laforte, and Diego Danny Tantillo. They were allegedly strong-arming their way into the garbage business, setting up no-show jobs, and in Tantillo's case, dipping into pension funds and rigging demolition bids all over New York City. So yeah, quiet or not, the Gambinos are still playing the game, just with a whole lot more eyes watching them. Then, June 2024 hits, and guess who's back in the headlines? Yep, the Gambinos. This time, they were running a full-blown illegal sports gambling ring and a nasty loan sharking operation straight out of Staten Island. We're talking $22.7 million in bets and about $500,000 a week from loan payments. That ain't no chump change. That's mob money in full swing. 17 guys were arrested, members like John J. Laforte, Anthony J. Cinqua, John Matera, and a crew of loyal associates. So for anyone thinking that the Mafia is just another chapter in the history book, well, I guess the Gambinos missed that memo, because they're still out there playing the game, old school style. But here's the real question. Are they actually fading out, or just biding their time for some kind of big comeback? Let us know what you think in the comments below. So there you have it. The man who ruled the New York streets and terrified his enemies died in prison with a slowly fading legacy and a crew that barely even looked back. But what was it like inside his solitary confinement? I mean, that's where the real pain was. Tap on our next video, Inside John Gotti's Life in Solitary Confinement, to see how that isolation broke the Dapper Dawn.